In an ancient Buddhist temple nestled in the snow-capped mountains of the Himalayas, where the thin air carried the sounds of wind chimes and morning prayers, there lived a young monk named Tashi. His story began on a cold winter's night when he was found as a baby, wrapped in a worn shawl on the temple steps. Beside him, there was only a small jade amulet with inscriptions faded by time, the sole link to his unknown past. The monks of the temple took him in and raised him as if he were the child of all, yet belonging to none. As he grew, Tashi proved to be a dedicated and kind young man, always ready to help with the temple's most humble tasks. His calloused hands knew every stone on the path, every grain of sand in the gardens he swept daily. Yet behind his diligent gestures and serene smile, there was a deep restlessness that few noticed. Every morning, before the sun rose, Tashi would wake earlier than the other monks to complete his tasks. At the center of the temple was a beautiful garden, and at its heart lay a large reflecting pool, so clear it mirrored the sky as if it were a window to another world. It was in this sacred space that his inner turmoil revealed itself most strongly. As he swept the fallen leaves around the reflecting pool, Tashi developed an elaborate ritual to avoid seeing his own reflection. Sometimes he walked backwards. At other times, he kept his gaze fixed on the ground, or waited for a soft breeze to ripple the water's surface, distorting any image that might form. In his mind, he nurtured the belief that his abandonment was undeniable proof of his insignificance. The other young monks, like him, studied the teachings of the Buddha and often gathered to discuss ancient sutras and share their insights. Although Tashi knew the texts as well as any of them, he always sat in the farthest corners, convinced that his interpretations held no worth. When questioned, he would respond in a soft voice, almost a whisper, as if apologizing for his own existence. At night, in his small cell, Tashi would spend hours meditating, seeking the peace the teachings promised. Yet even in those moments of introspection, his mind was plagued by unanswered questions. Why had he been abandoned? What worth could someone have if even their parents did not want them? How could he attain enlightenment while bearing the weight of being unwanted? The jade amulet, his only link to the past, rested on a small altar he had built in his cell. Sometimes he would spend hours staring at it, trying to decipher the faded inscriptions, as if in those worn markings he might find some clue to his true worth. On full moon nights, when moonlight filtered through the small window of his cell and illuminated the jade, Tashi would imagine stories about its origin, some grand, others tragic, but all aimed at filling the void he felt. His years of practice at the temple had taught him much about compassion for others. Tashi was always the first to offer help to weary pilgrims seeking shelter, sharing his portion of food with those in need, and caring with special devotion for the elderly monks. Yet this same compassion seemed impossible to direct toward himself. There was something profoundly contradictory about his situation. While the Buddhist teachings spoke of the Buddha nature present in all beings, of the illusion of the self and the truth of non-self, Tashi clung tightly to the story of abandonment he had constructed about himself. It was as if he carried two worlds within him, the outer world of the dedicated and serene monk, and the inner world of the abandoned child still searching for his place. It was in this state of inner contradiction that Master Rinchen began to observe him more closely. The old master, known for his deep wisdom and ability to see beyond appearances, recognized in Tashi the common paradox of many spiritual seekers, the ability to see the light in everyone except in themselves. Master Rinchen was renowned throughout the temple for his unique way of teaching. Unlike other masters who offered lengthy discourses on the sutras, he preferred to create situations that led his disciples to discover the truth for themselves. His eyes, as deep as the reflecting pool in the garden, seemed to pierce through the layers of illusion his students built around themselves. For years, Rinchen silently observed Tashi. He saw how the young monk avoided his own reflection, how he slightly bowed as he walked, and how his voice softened when in a group. But he also noticed something that Tashi himself could not see: the natural light that radiated from him when he helped others without thinking of himself, when he became absorbed in his daily tasks with full presence, and when his face lit up upon hearing the teachings of the Dharma. On a particularly significant morning, when the first rays of sunlight still struggled to break through the mist covering the mountains, Rinchen called Tashi to his quarters. The master's room was simple, as tradition required, but something was different that day. Dozens of mirrors of various sizes were arranged in a circle in the center of the room. "Tashi," the master said in his serene voice, "I have a special task for you." The young monk bowed respectfully, avoiding the mirrors surrounding him. In the reflecting pool of the central garden lies a jewel of inestimable value. It has been there for generations, guarded by every master who has passed through this temple. Now, the time has come for it to be revealed. Tashi's eyes widened at the responsibility being entrusted to him. "But, venerable master," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "why me? Surely there are monks more worthy of this task." Rinchen smiled, a smile that seemed to contain all the mysteries of the universe. "The jewel chooses its guardian, Tashi, and it has chosen you." The master then rose and walked to one of the larger mirrors. "But before you seek it, you must learn to see correctly. Each reflection tells a different story, but only one shows the truth." Throughout that morning, the master guided Tashi through a peculiar exercise. In each mirror, he asked the young monk to observe his reflection and describe what he saw. In some mirrors, the image appeared distorted, in others blurred. There were mirrors that made Tashi look taller, others made him appear shorter. "What is real?" Rinchen asked with each new observation. Confused and increasingly uncomfortable, Tashi struggled to find an answer that would satisfy his master. "None of the images are real," he finally concluded. "They're all distortions." "Ah," Rinchen smiled, "but if none are real, how do you know you exist?" The question struck Tashi like a thunderbolt on a clear day. It was one of those Zen questions that seemed to have no logical answer, but planted seeds of deep understanding. "Now," Rinchen continued, "your task is to clean the reflecting pool in the garden. You must remove every leaf with patience and mindfulness. But remember, the jewel is extremely delicate. Any sudden movement may cause it to be lost forever in the depths of the pool." The master then handed Tashi a small bamboo rake, made especially for this task. "Use this wisely. Each leaf you remove is like a thought that clouds the truth. Every movement must be made with the awareness that you are not just clearing water, but preparing the way for a sacred discovery." Before Tashi left the room, Rinchen added one final instruction. "And Tashi, during this task, you must carefully observe your reflection in the water every morning, not as a punishment, but as part of the path to finding the jewel." The young monk's heart tightened at this last instruction, but he nodded respectfully. As he walked out of the master's quarters, carrying the bamboo rake, his mind was filled with questions. Why had the master chosen him for this task? How could he trust his own reflection after seeing so many different distortions in the mirrors? And most importantly, how would he find a jewel he could not see without disturbing the water that concealed it? With the bamboo rake in hand, Tashi began his daily journey to the reflecting pool. The first morning was particularly challenging. His hands trembled each time he approached the clear surface, and his heart raced when he caught a glimpse of his own reflection among the floating leaves. The task required a delicacy he had never needed to exercise before. Each movement of the rake created small ripples in the water, and Tashi soon realized that he needed to find his own rhythm. Neither too fast, which would disturb the water too much, nor too slow, which would allow more leaves to fall before he could finish. As the days passed, Tashi began to notice patterns in the falling leaves. Some were heavy and sank quickly, like his darker thoughts about abandonment. Others were light and danced on the surface, resisting the rake, like his persistent doubts about his own worth. The hardest ones were those that had been in the water so long they had become part of the bottom, like his deepest, most ingrained beliefs about himself. One particularly frustrating morning, after hours of meticulous work, Tashi thought he saw a golden shimmer at the bottom of the reflecting pool. His heart leapt with anticipation, and in a moment of excitement, he plunged his hand into the water to try to reach it. The water, which had been relatively clear, instantly became murky, and the shimmer disappeared completely. Sitting at the edge of the pool, with his sleeves soaked and frustration heavy in his chest, Tashi began to question the entire process. Was there really a jewel? Or was it just another of Master Rinchen's enigmatic teachings? And if there was a jewel, why did it always seem just out of reach? It was in this moment of doubt that something unexpected happened. A small bird landed on the edge of the reflecting pool. Without fear or hesitation, it drank a few sips, causing gentle ripples on the surface. Tashi watched, fascinated, as the ripples did not disturb the clarity of the water. It was as if they were a natural part of its essence. This observation brought Tashi his first insight. Perhaps the murky water wasn't a problem to be solved, but part of the process of clarification. Just like his own thoughts and emotions, the water needed time to settle naturally. In the days that followed, Tashi developed a new approach. Instead of trying to keep the water perfectly still, he began to work in harmony with its natural movements. He learned that each leaf had its own time to be removed, just as each negative thought had its own time to be understood and released. Sometimes other young monks would pass through the garden and ask about his progress in finding the jewel. Tashi realized that he no longer felt diminished by these questions. Somehow, the very act of cleaning the reflecting pool was also clearing something inside him. In his evening meditations, he began to notice parallels between the murky water and his own mind. Just as the water needed time to clear after being disturbed, his mind also needed space to find its natural clarity. The teachings about the nature of the mind, which once seemed like abstract concepts, were beginning to make sense through his direct experience. One night, after a particularly challenging day, Tashi had a dream. In it, he saw himself as a child, sitting at the edge of the same reflecting pool. His younger reflections smiled at him with an innocence he had long forgotten. When he awoke, silent tears ran down his face. Not tears of sadness, but of a deep recognition he couldn't yet name. The murky water had become his teacher. It taught him patience when his mind craved immediate results. It taught him acceptance when he resisted the process. And most importantly, it taught him about the transient nature of all mental states. Just as the murkiest water eventually clears if left undisturbed, even the most troubling thoughts eventually quiet down. After weeks of daily practice, Tashi realized that he no longer avoided looking at his reflection in the water. In fact, he began to develop a genuine curiosity about the different ways his image appeared. Sometimes clear, sometimes distorted, but always part of the same reflecting pool, always part of his present experience. One day, as he performed his morning task, Tashi noticed something different. The water was particularly clear that morning, but not because of his efforts. It was as if the very nature of the water was clarity, and the leaves in the murk were merely temporary visitors. This realization left him speechless, and he sat in silence by the pool, watching as the early morning sunlight danced on the surface. It was then that he decided to seek out Master Rinchen. Not because he had found the jewel, but because he was beginning to suspect that there was something more to this search than he had initially imagined. When Tashi found Master Rinchen that morning, the sun had already fully risen, bathing the temple in its golden light. The old master was seated in his usual meditation spot, as if waiting for him. "Venerable Master," Tashi began, bowing deeply, "I have worked on the reflecting pool as instructed. I have removed countless leaves, watched the murky water clear, and seen reflections form and dissolve. But I must confess something. I have not found the jewel." Rinchen smiled, the same enigmatic smile he had offered at the beginning of the task. "Come with me," he said, rising with the grace of someone who carried decades of mindful practice in every movement. Together, master and disciple walked to the reflecting pool. The surface was clearer than Tashi had ever seen it, reflecting the blue sky and passing clouds as if it were a window to another world. The leaves that had once covered the surface were all gone, revealing the natural depth of the pool. "Look at your reflection now," Rinchen instructed. Tashi, who a few weeks ago would have hesitated at such a request, leaned over the water without resistance. What he saw left him speechless. In the reflection, he saw his face, but it was as if he were seeing it for the first time. His eyes, which he had always considered ordinary, now shone with a compassion cultivated through years of service at the temple. His features, which he used to avoid, bore the serenity of countless hours of meditation. Even the small lines on his face told stories of kindness and dedication. "What do you see?" the master asked. "I see." Tashi paused, searching for the right words. "I see someone who has always been here, but whom I never truly knew." Rinchen nodded, satisfied. "And the jewel?" In that moment, a deep understanding struck Tashi like a ray of light passing through a crystal. Tears began to flow silently from his eyes, creating small ripples on the water's surface. But this time, the ripples did not disturb him. They were part of the same truth he was discovering. "The jewel," he whispered, "was never beneath the water, was it?" The master gently placed his hand on Tashi's shoulder. "What do you think?" "The jewel is the reflection itself. Or rather, it is the ability to see our true self without the distortions we create. It's not something to be found, but something that has always been there, waiting to be recognized." Rinchen smiled more broadly now. "And what happened to that young monk who couldn't bear to look at his own reflection?" Tashi reflected for a moment, realizing how his journey had transformed not only his view of himself, but also his understanding of what it means to have worth. He discovered he was searching in the wrong place. He was so busy seeking validation in external confirmations, in achievements, in being worthy, that he couldn't see what had always been there. "And the jade amulet?" the master asked, referring to the only object that connected Tashi to his unknown past. Tashi touched the amulet he still carried with him, but now with a new understanding. "It's just an amulet. It doesn't define who I am, just as my story of abandonment doesn't define my worth. They are merely leaves on the surface of the water." The master then sat down by the edge of the reflecting pool and motioned for Tashi to join him. "You see, Tashi, the Buddha taught that our true nature is like a perfect diamond. It may be covered in mud, but its shining nature is never affected. Spiritual practice is not about creating something new or reaching some special state. It is simply about removing the obstacles that prevent us from recognizing what has always been there." "Like the leaves on the reflecting pool," Tashi said. "Exactly. And now that you've understood this, what will be your next step?" Tashi looked once more at his reflection in the water, now without fear or hesitation. "To help others see their own jewel, their own true worth. Because now I understand that every being carries this same precious nature, even if they can't yet recognize it." The sun was high in the sky now, and its rays danced on the surface of the reflecting pool, creating thousands of tiny points of light. To Tashi, each reflection was a reminder of a truth that was now engraved in his heart. Our true worth is not something to be earned or proven. It is our very essence, as natural as the reflection in clear water.